Thank you so much, and I would like to welcome all of you to this keynote session of the Peace and Dharma Conference. But first, I begin with the land acknowledgement. Please join me in reflection as I read this land acknowledgement. The Fresno State campus sits in the midst of San Joaquin Valley, a valley rich in the traditions and representation of Native American peoples and cultures. We are grateful to be in the traditional homelands of the Yokuts and Mono people, whose diverse tribal communities share stewardship over this land. Thank you. So now I would like to invite our first singer, who is Prayer, from Diya Shah, a 7th grade student. One of my students used to sing every year the Jain prayer and Hindu prayer. Now she graduated, she went to medical school. So I called her, do you have anybody else? Here comes her niece. How beautiful is that? Come on, Diya. Go, beta.
Good evening. My name is Diya Shah. Today is Gandhi Jayanti. As most of you are aware, Gandhiji's practice of nonviolence principles was inspired by Jainism. As a Jain, I will be reciting our most sacred mantra or prayer called Nokar Mantra. Nokar Mantra is a prayer to 5 supreme spiritual entities: Arihantas, the perfect human beings; the Siddhas, liberated bodiless souls; Acharyas, masters and heads of congregations; Upadhyas, spiritual teachers; and Sadhus, spiritual practitioners in the world. This mantra serves as a spiritual cleanser and reminds us to stay humble, to respect all forms of life, and to walk the path of nonviolence and truthfulness. Namo Ariyantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ariyanam, Namo Jainam, Namo Loe Savasahunam, Iso Panchanamukaro Savabhava Panasano, Mangalanancha Savisin Parmam Havai Mangalam. Namo Namo, Namo Namo, Namo Namo, Namo Namo. Next, I'll be reciting a Hindu prayer called Shanti Mantra. This mantra is an invocation for universal peace, seeking calm in the sky, inner spaces, earth, plants, water, and the entire universe, culminating in a plea for divine and solitary peace. It's a comprehensive call for peace on all levels, recognizing that peace within ourselves is connected to the harmony of the world around us. Om Dyo Shanti, Rantariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Rapa Shanti, Oshadya Shanti, Vanaspatya Shanti, Vishvedeva Shanti, Brahma Shanti, Sarvam Shanti, Shanti Reva Shanti, Shama Shanti Redi, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.
Impressive. That mantra is hard to memorize. We all know that. The peace to the whole universe, peace to the earth, peace to herbs, peace to all aspects of life. So we start with prayer. Now I'd like to invite our president, University President Saul Jimenez Sandoval, who is not only a dedicated teacher, he embodies the values of Dharma. He was a professor of Portuguese literature. So, how many times we get presidents who are, that's why he's so wonderful in speaking. He's a great supporter of the Gandhi Center and Jain and Hindu Dharma initiative at Fresno State, We are grateful that he took time out of his very busy schedule. I know how busy you are. I'm also thankful to his lovely wife, Dr. A. Are you here, Dr. A? Oh my God, all the way back. Hey. And my dear colleague who is here as well. So.
Thank you, Dr. Howard, and it's great to see all of you here today. I had to defend this space and this time to be here with you with many requests for my time, but I needed to be here in order to hear those mantras that we just heard previously. I record them and then I play them when I need them the most for this comprehensive peace, that we all need in the world. So with that, I want to give you a warm welcome. It's great to see all of you here today, and I want to thank especially the Uberoi Foundation. The trustees who are here, they have traveled far from India, from Florida, and from Pennsylvania. Can you please stand and be recognized if you are here? Bravo. I want to thank you for your generous support of this conference and for all that you do to support Dr. Howard's research and scholarly activities. And it's also great to see our friends, the people who made it all happen, Dr. Naina Patel, Dr. Ravi Patel, Sudha Bhatt, and others who have come from Bakersfield. Can they please stand? So thank you very much for your support of the Gandhi Center and the Jain and Hindu Endowment at Fresno State. Your dedication represents the broader vision of Sarvodaya and Dharma, the values of justice, the values of peace, the values of nonviolence, and they align beautifully with the mission of Fresno State. I would also like to welcome both of our keynote speakers. I'm sorry that I would miss the first one, but I'm here for the second one. First, Dr. Francis Clooney. He's a Jesuit priest, and he's also a Hindu specialist. Please give him a warm applause. And next, of course, Bhawa Jain. I'm sorry that I missed your talk earlier, but I hope to see a recording of it and learn from your wisdom as well. Let's also welcome scholars who have traveled from distant places to participate in this conference. Mahatma Gandhi is an example of Dharma and has become the icon and inspiration for positive social change and peace. His philosophy of nonviolence changed the course of human history by illuminating a path for the individual to make lasting change through peaceful and creative action. I also want to thank the students for being here. I see a lot of you. I know that you're taking a class. This is primarily for you. It really is for you because you are the future and you will take these lessons with you throughout your life. The term Sarvodaya, the uplift of all, the care for all, the progress for all, deeply resonates with me personally. That's what I believe in, and also I strive to do that in my daily life. Fresno State is a learning ground where we celebrate diversity. We offer opportunities to ensure student success and broaden their intellectual horizons. Education in peace, projects of service to others, and programs in developing inner peace that would contribute to our commitment of boldly educating and empowering our students for success. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about Dr. Veena Howard, who is here with us today. She has been the leading power behind everything dealing with peace at Fresno State for so long. I want to thank you for all you do. You embody sometimes Durga. Actually, all the time, you embody Durga. But you also embody excellence in teaching, excellence in scholarship. She's a renowned scholar, and excellence in leadership. I want to thank her for her indefatigable efforts. Thanks to her, Fresno State is now training scholars, all of you students here. That's why I mentioned you earlier, who will become tomorrow's leaders. You here, students, are armed with knowledge and resolve. The terms like Satyagraha, Ahimsa, or Sarvodaya, they now form part of your DNA. And when you grow up and you graduate, and And when you become professionals, what will happen? These powerful terms will resonate in you. You will be a leader with these powerful terms, and you will be a leader that will make the world a better place. These terms now constitute powerful and fundamental elements of your own DNA, your very special intellectual DNA that then translates into your spiritual DNA. With that, I want to thank you for being here, all of you, and please let's enjoy our keynote speaker. Thank you, everyone.
Aren't we proud of our president? I mean, using the all words, Sarvodaya, Dharma, Satyagraha, Ahimsa, oh my gosh, that's so great. Thank you so much for your kind and generous words. And it takes a whole village to come together for these kind of events or the initiatives that we've done. Our deans, they both are here, Dean Chapman and Dean Matt Darling as well, and I saw Dean Bernadette here. And I mean, look around, the house is full. And I think it's the people students, faculty, staff, everybody comes together to make these things happen. Not a one person cannot do. That's why it's Sarvo, the uplift of all, that we believe in. So speaking of students, I've been teaching a course on Asian religions, and one of my students, so we said, okay, what do we say about Dharma? So he volunteered to offer a reflection on the idea of Dharma. So we'll hear from Andres Tutliers. Please welcome Andres.
Dr. Howard. Hello, everyone. First of all, in the name of students, thank you, Mr. President, for your words. We appreciate it a lot. So first of all, I want to start clarifying that I am not here for extra credit. I volunteered, okay? Important, right off the bat. I am just genuinely excited as a student for this conference. I am very excited because I learned about the idea of Dharma just a few weeks ago in Dr. Howard's class on Asian religions. I am still trying to understand such a complex concept, and I am looking forward to learn more about this idea through this event. As an international student from Chile, South America, I had no clue what the concept of Dharma was until I learned it in class. Therefore, I am very grateful and extremely lucky as a student that this conference is taking place here the semester I'm taking these classes. I learned in Dr. Howard's class just a couple weeks ago again that the Sanskrit term dharma stems from its root word dra, which means to hold, to sustain, or to maintain. Dharma was, ironically, an elusive term for me. Does it mean duty? Does it mean order? Law? Virtue? Truth? Morality? All of the above? How can something that means to sustain not sustain its one meaning in my mind in class? The term settled for me when Judah, a classmate of mine in Dr. Howard's class, so elegantly described it as what I ought to do. So it became clear to me how all of those terms above are associated with it. Dharma is the law that maintains cosmic order, and as a religion, it has characteristics that frustrate the division between the secular and the sacred for Western definitions of religion. When Dharma is followed, humans are in conformity with the law that sustains the universe, maintains interpersonal relationships, and calls on people to do their duty, or the right thing, as we read in the Bhagavad Gita in class and learned through Jain teachings. The study of it, therefore, grants us the tools to be who we ought to be and do what we ought to do and approach the life that we live in the best way possible, regardless of our religious and cultural background. As someone who was raised in Catholic South America, I was quick to learn many do's and don'ts in my religion, so it has been very refreshing as a student to learn about Dharma, an idea that is welcoming and understanding of who we ought to be even means to begin with. It is my honor to invite back Dr. Howard, our dear professor and chair of the philosophy department. Dr. Howard's teaching style resonates deeply with me since she makes learning accessible, dialectical, and dialogical. As her students, we know that she enjoys her Dharma teaching. Thank you.
You made my day. You don't know what they're going to say. Wow, that was great, Andre. So, I mean, he hardly speaks too much in class, so it was really great. Wow, lot of joy, Dharma joy, right? Dharma is also joy. So the topic of this conference came about last spring in March while I was in India on my Fulbright. Anu Bhatia, who is one of the board of trustees, we talked on the phone and she just had returned from a peace conference. And she said, when you're doing conference, why don't you focus on peace? Right, remember that? Yes, so then I came up with the idea of peace and dharma. So all these terms in our topic or the title, Dharma, Ethics, Nonviolence, Peace, are not random words. As Andre just shared, they are interconnected. We need to learn about nonviolence in this very violent world and very restless world. As the term for this last 4 or 5 years is restlessness. Very lack of center has shifted somehow, as you were saying, Baba Janji, in your speech as well. Dharma offers ethical guidance how to create inner peace and outer harmony through Sarvodaya, uplift of all. So today is October 2nd, Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. This is the first time I have done conference right at the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi. Usually it's few days before, a few days after. And today is the International Day of Nonviolence. Today is the Hindu holiday of Vijayadashmi, and Vijayadashmi means celebrating victory of good over evil, victory of light over darkness. Today is Jewish high holiday Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And in a couple of days, we'll have the feast day of Saint Francis, a patron saint of animals, ecology, nature, care for all, Sarvodaya. So what a constellation of holidays today. It really is almost good luck. It's like something happened when I was reflecting today. I said, wow, this is cool. So this conference is a collaboration among annual Oberoi meeting OM, MK Gandhi Center, Inner Peace and Sarvodaya, and Jain and Hindu Dharma Initiative. So I want to, again, thank the Oberoi Foundation Board of Trustees for coming all the way from India and supporting the conference. And I am also grateful to Drs. Nana and Ravi Patel, who came from Bakersfield. I know how busy you are. That's really, CU is happy. Thank you for giving our students, our community, the gift of the Gandhi Center and for being here every step of the way. And I would like also to thank our dozen supporters of Jain and Hindu Dharma Initiative at Fresno State. Some of our Jain friends could not come here. And thank you, Sudha Bhattji, for taking us to the finish line for our Jain and Hindu Dharma Initiative. And I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Raja Rosenhagen, the coordinator of Peace and Nonviolence Studies, who is supporting both endowed initiatives. Of course, I want to thank our leadership team for their support. President, as he spoke so eloquently, I mean, it gives you warmth, it gives you energy to spend, 80 hours a week and go for it. And it is the support that helps us to move. And Dean Chapman is here. Thank you for all your leadership and support. I'm grateful to our scholar friends. So good to see you, all of you who had traveled from far places, many flights to get here. And I'm so happy to see, I'm sorry to yank you out of your discussions and talks, and tomorrow you can talk a lot. Today's, forgive me. So my dear students, all of you, please engage with these scholars. We're covering Jain unit right now, Jainism, and then Buddhism. Engage with them at lunch, anywhere. Food is provided, all if you are there. So all this programming is really for you, as President said. And I want to thank my right hand, Ruth Aparicio, who is our department DEA, Susan Lam, Mai Fung, and our angelic team of students. So please give a round of applause for everybody. We are right on time. So I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Professor Francis X. Clooney, SJ. He joined the Harvard Divinity School faculty in 2005, where he is the Parkman Professor of Divinity and Professor of Comparative Theology. He's a leading figure globally in the developing field of comparative theology. He has authored over a dozen scholarly books and numerous scholarly and popular articles. In his works, he compares Hindu theology and Christian theology. He's doing this for over 30, 40 years, long time. And he wrote several groundbreaking books. And I want to share a few of them here, names. Hindu Wisdom for All God's Children. That's one of the book name. Hindu Wisdom for All God's Children. Next one, Hindu God and Christian God. How Reason Helps Break Down the Boundaries Between Religion. Look at the titles. Please do look up those books. Divine Mother, Blessed Mother, Hindu Goddess and the Virgin Mary. And his most recent memoir, Hindu and Catholic, Priest and Scholar, A Love Story. I love that book. I highly recommend reading it. I just finished it. He has also authored many articles in faith journals. I just want to share a couple of titles. The one is The Religious Significance of Vegetarianism. He became vegetarian. He was quite young when he went to Nepal or India. The religious significance of vegetarianism. The second is The Clash of Religions is Overstated. The Coming of Interfaith Awareness is Irreversible. Yay. And finally, Learning Interreligiously as a Key to a Better World. He is an erudite scholar, constructive thinker, and a compassionate teacher. I want to study with him even for 2 months. I told him last night. Above all, he combines his vocation as a Jesuit priest with the scholarly pursuit of Hindu theology and devotion poetry of Tamil saints. I had the privilege to meet Dr. Clooney many years back when I was still a master's student. I found him always kind and soft-spoken, but I felt intimidated, even though he was so soft-spoken, because he was such an eminent scholar. I always made the point to attend 1 or 2 of his sessions at the American Academy of Religions, in which he either presented or served as a commentator, because you learned so much from his style, how he was speaking about other people's papers. His presentations were insightful, and he was always gracious in his comments, especially to junior scholars. I see him as a bridge builder, building bridges between his Catholic faith and Hindu studies, and academic study of religious traditions with the pursuit of deep spirituality. He's an exemplary academic and does his dharma both as an academic and spiritual seeker with great grace and dexterity. We are fortunate to have him here. Welcome.
So thank you, everyone. I think if I repeated all the thanks that I wanted to give, repeating everything that has been said already, my time would be gone. But Professor Veena had suggested to me to go no longer than 40 minutes, watching your watches, and she'll give me a 5-minute warning so that I can leave time for questions and discussion, because that's really what I'm interested in tonight, to learn from you by what you think of what I have to say. So thank you to everyone who's been thanked already, my own heartfelt thanks in addition. In taking up the topic from my own angle, you have to understand that when I think of this wonderful title, Dharma, in relation to peace, to nonviolence, to justice, bettering our world, I think it's my job to try to make us think a little bit about what we're talking about. Many things have been said beautifully today. Mr. Nawajain has said beautifully, spoken already. Things have been said, and you know these things, and that's why you're here, why you think about these things. But to kind of ask ourselves, what are we really talking about when we talk about Dharma, when we talk about Dharma as essential in today's world, in today's United States? By asking ourselves, do we really know what we are talking about? And can we make it really matter for us as a part of our life and the part of the way we relate to one another, shaking up our system, shaking ourselves up, and then shaking up our society as well. And I think what I want to do this is to really follow out the title that I put up here, Dharma as Radical Tradition. That Dharma has a past, we know this. Dharma also takes us out of the present moment, pushes us back into the past that precedes us by thousands of years. And that while Dharma goes very well and appropriately with words like justice, peace, nonviolence, it also takes us to a place where we really have not been before. Because we're not people who lived in the current bodies and the current consciousness 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. We have to be able to think differently. And what I'd like to suggest is that if we are trying, particularly the youngest members of our gathering tonight, to be working for justice and peace in the long run, we really have to find out where we are coming from and think more deeply about the past, about the traditions, and how we relate to those traditions. Where we're not inventing the world in the year 2025. We're not the first people to think about the values of human life. We're not the first people to be in situations of danger. Therefore, to go back and think and say, when we're young, what is it that will energize us that we can do it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years down the road? Or when somebody like me, older, looks back on my life and said, how did I get to the point I'm in? When was I faithful? Did I lose my way? When did I try to find my way in terms of justice, in terms of love, compassion, and Dharma? What I'd like to do is take this general title, Dharma as Radical Tradition, by looking at one ancient sage, Ramanuja. He was a Hindu theologian, a Vaishnava theologian of South India, who lived about 1,000 years ago. And Ramanuja is thought of as a reforming figure, but as I will attempt to exemplify for you in a few words, also a man of tradition, and sometimes tradition that rubs people the wrong way. And likewise, in the light of Ramanuja, to look at Mahatma Gandhi, so well known to many of you could just come up and give the talk that I'm trying to give tonight. Rather, Gandhi himself is a figure who's provocative because he's not exactly what we want him to be. He can frustrate us by his traditionalism. He can frustrate us by being stubborn and holding on to certain values that we wish he would just put in the closet and forget about. But my thesis, and really for the sake of our argument tonight, is to say that the figures who have roots in tradition and therefore don't quite fit into the world in which we live are the figures who can shake things up effectively and help us to be better people. That the mix, not simply being a traditionalist, I want to go and live in the past, but rather I'm rooted in traditions that don't belong here, that challenge 2025, and then say, on that basis, from that insight, I will begin to reform the world around me. That interplay between tradition and now is really at the heart of what I want to say, looking at Ramanuja, looking at Gandhi, and looking finally at ourselves. Now, when I started learning about Dharma, I read the work of great scholars such as Patrick Olivelle, Donald Davis, P.B. Kane, who did a massive history of Dharma Shastra in the early part of in the mid-20th century, and figures such as Professor Veena Howard, who edited the volume Dharma, the Hindu, Jain, Buddhist, and Sikh traditions of India, opening up many different perspectives on what Dharma means. But I, in my own way, when I was a student at the University of Chicago, I learned it by looking at Hindu ritual. The ancient school of thought, you don't have to spell this word, Mimamsa. Mimamsa was a school of thought that opened up Dharma in terms of the interplay between the sacrificial model of the world. Everything is involved in the sacrifice, the fire sacrifices, the mantras, the evocations of deities, and that the world itself continues to exist because these sacrifices are performed, the mantras are recited, and everyone and everything in the universe is part of this massive ritual performance. And in some ways, that's very inspiring. Everything is interconnected. Nothing is an island unto itself. We all belong together. But it's also, I found, and this was 45 years ago when I was in grad school, finding that it's also frightening because it says to us, guess what? You are not the center of your universe. The world is not spinning around you. The world is not even spinning around the human race. The world is connected to all living beings, and indeed to things like fire, water, air, stone. Everything is interconnected. And even the deities in heaven, and even the Veda, the sacred Veda, are parts of a system that is larger than any of them. And this kind of struck me and both kind of put me off at first because it seemed heartless. Somebody told me once that if you study this Mimamsa system long enough, it will shrink and dry out your heart. You'll have no heart left, you'll have no compassion or anything. But I think it's also the rude awakening they needed then and we need now, that the universe does not revolve around us, and that as much as we may care rightly for one another, care for all forms of life, care for the planet itself, somehow we're part of something that's much older than us, that will continue when we're gone, and that somehow we have to participate in this as best we can, as selflessly as we can, and that's Dharma. Dharma of interconnectedness that I think resonates in different ways. We could talk about this with Hindu tradition, Jain tradition, Buddhist tradition, Sikh tradition, and other traditions as well. This all came clear to me a few years ago, and I'll come back to this example, when in the oldest text of this Mimamsa system, the sutras, these little verses, 2,700 little verses that kind of explain everything, in that text talking about who is eligible to perform sacrifices. There's a whole section in the 6th book that talks about the eligibility for sacrifice. And it starts with the position, well, the reason you perform sacrifices is to go to heaven. Heaven is not a place, heaven is happiness. Everyone wants to be happy, therefore everyone has the right to perform sacrifices. However, once it begins to work out in terms of who's actually eligible for sacrifices, they begin to pull back and say, well, it doesn't mean literally everybody wants to be happy, therefore everyone does the sacrifices, but there are rules in the book, there are rules in the Shastra, there are all these teaching texts, teach us different ways to think about who can do what. And in very kind of dispassionate, but to us kind of heartless language, people who are disabled are often unable to perform sacrifices because they can't walk around the fire, they can't see things when they're supposed to see them, they can't recite the mantras, whatever. People who are too poor to finance a sacrifice can't do the sacrifice. Women are unfortunately excluded from performing sacrifices by themselves because the Vedic text doesn't say that they can. And Shudras, men of the 4th caste, cannot perform sacrifices because one text that is taken as normative doesn't mention them. Therefore, the presumption is that they can't do it. Now, this again seemed to me like, why do we even care about this? This is so outdated, this is so antiquated, this is so far back and really offensive in some ways to us. But then I keep reading in that same chapter, then having stated all of this with dispassion, no polemic, no putting down, no talking about anything negative about women or negative about people who are disabled or negative about Shudras, just that you can't because of this text, this text, this text, this text. And the second part of the chapter says, however, under certain conditions, people who are disabled can perform sacrifices. People who are poor may find the funding they need to perform sacrifices. It's not a great concession, but women who are married with their spouse can perform sacrifices. And Shudras who cannot perform sacrifices can, under the following conditions, if they're in certain categories, perform sacrifices. And what struck me here is that it seems to be, it's not about you as a person, me as a person, whatever our gender, whatever our state in life, whatever our health, whatever our wealth, etc. But rather, there are rules governing reality, and those rules governing reality don't revolve around us. And society has a certain hierarchical structure to it that, like it or not, can be implemented in everyday society. Now, this is 2,000 years ago. This is not now. There's no guarantee that the authors of some of these texts would 2,000 years later say the same thing. But so we can't be anachronistic and sort of blame them for not thinking like us. But I did have greater expectations that in the sense of dispassion about following the rules, dispassion about who gets to do what, again, any lack of polemic about any of the individuals involved, and exceptions when they can be made, is very legal and even legalistic. And that is sort of essential to thinking about how the world works. There are rules that govern things. The rules can't easily be broken. That's Dharma. Now, when I turn to Vedanta, the system that is based on the Upanishads, that is more philosophical, that has this sense of seeking the self, seeking ultimate reality. Many of the Upanishads put sacrifice down as a lower level of knowledge, karma, and the higher knowledge is knowledge or jnana. I hoped in these texts that there would be a stronger sense, and indeed there is, as in Buddhism, protest against Varna, the 4 categories of society, or the caste system, putting it down and saying, no, that's not what matters. It's something about what's inside you that matters more. And therefore, in Vedanta, the rules should change. And the rules should come out very differently because we put all of that aside because we're reforming, and at that point, we can leave tradition aside. Then I learned by reading figures such as Shankara, the great non-dualist theologian, and the one I mentioned a few minutes ago, Ramanuja, that in fact, these rules are not necessarily flexible when you come to the basics of what counts in society. So Ramanuja, a great theologian, 1,000 years ago, we just had his millennial celebration in 2017. He allegedly, by tradition, lived 120 years, a long life, is held up today as a figure of reform, of liberation of society. If you ever go, and some of you I'm sure have been there, Hyderabad in India, there is a 216-foot statue of Ramanuja sitting in kind of an imperial, cross-legged, but in a position like he's clearly a ruler. And the Chinnajir Swami, the Swami at whose ashram this was built, has words like these there. What is the message of Ramanuja? Shed your ego, serve all beings as service to God, serve society, which is the universal form of God. No one is infallible. Do not humiliate anyone. What really matters is purity of mind and deed and heart. Then goes on to say, a spiritual revolutionary unlike any other was Ramanuja. So then I turned the page, literally I just turned my page, and I went to the Vedanta text that is parallel to the Mimamsa text I was reading, and come to the section where it talks about not who is eligible to perform sacrifices, but who is eligible to have Upanishadic knowledge. There's a section I can give the references if anyone wants to read the translation or follow up on the Sanskrit, whatever. I'm thinking, okay, here Ramanuja will clearly say, none of that matters. Everybody is eligible to self-knowledge. Everybody is free to study the Upanishads. And he and his non-dualist predecessor, Shankara, a few hundred years before Ramanuja, when it comes to interpreting this passage, they say, well, the book says that only certain people have the eligibility to have this knowledge. Only certain people can really understand and follow the Upanishads, and other people cannot. So it goes through the categories again about people who are disabled in various ways, and it comes to the case of the Shudras, the 4th caste. It's not untouchables, but it's rather people of the 4th of the traditional Varnas. And it says, because of the rules in the book, they are not eligible to read the Upanishads. They're not eligible to learn in this way about the nature of the true self. In fact, it's even worse than in the Mimamsa, because the Mimamsa said there's no polemic, no vituperation, no attack on anybody. But in this text, it goes on in fairly form, quoting texts that seem to be older than Shankara and Ramanuja. Shudras are like a cremation ground. One should not recite the Veda in their vicinity. If a Shudra listens to Vedic recitation, his ears shall be filled with molten lead. If a Shudra repeats the Veda, his tongue shall be cut out. If he memorizes it, his body shall be slit open. And this is not, again, the old traditionalists. This is in the Vedanta reform tradition, where these new words come in. And I'm thinking, how can this be the case? And again, it reminds me that although Ramanuja, 216-foot statue and all, may be a great reforming figure, and I'll mention something about why that's actually true, when it comes to certain kinds of knowledge, he's as staunch and stubborn as the oldest traditionalist. So he simply says, the rules say this. And actually, this knowledge of the Upanishads is actually very valuable for certain kinds of people. And then he goes through the beautiful passage in his commentary at the end of this prohibition, saying, well, what God has ordained is that people of the upper 3 castes, they purify themselves, they do ascetical practices, they meditate, they become detached from the world, they study the Upanishads, and by all of this, they begin to be pleasing to God, Narayana Vishnu, who then gives them the grace of liberation. It says basically, this is what God wants for these kinds of people. Period. But what seems to be implied here, without his actually saying so, is that the rules of exclusion, these yes, that one no, are now in the hands of a merciful God. The merciful God says the rules will not change. The rules are in place. The rules apply to these people this way, and other people are excluded, with the implication being, and other people will find God in other ways. In this passage, he doesn't say that, but it seems to be the implication. You cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, but the same God who loves the higher caste in a certain way also is perfectly capable of loving other people in other ways, but the system doesn't go away. In one of his passages, I won't take time to read it, Ramanuja says, actually, Shankara's non-dualist Vedanta, which depends on knowledge completely, is in danger of overthrowing the meaning of the Veda altogether. Because if you realize knowledge alone matters, guess what? Shudras have brains like anybody else. Brahmins are not smarter than Shudras. Therefore, anyone who has knowledge reaches self-knowledge. You won't even need the Veda at all. You can take the text and put it in the fire. You don't need it anymore. Therefore, it is preferable to have this idea, everything depends on the will of God. And the will of God is that the traditions are held and kept in place. These people are treated this way. It's the ancient tradition for them. And then everybody else is cared for by God's will in a different way. And what struck me again, it's on my theme, is that there's a certain kind of strong, stubborn traditionalism to Ramanuja. He's not budging on the rules. In some ways, he's even harsher than the old Mimamsa ritualists. But on another level, without saying it, he's saying they can do this, and everybody else has another and better way. And in fact, if you go on, and we can't do it tonight because I don't have 3 hours to do this, you know from other works of Ramanuja that he in fact shows ways of breaking things open. So there's the Sanskritic tradition of karma, a certain kind of jnana or knowledge, a certain kind of bhakti or devotion that is heavily dedicated to performing penances, doing rituals, celebrating fasts, etc., etc. And yet he's the one who pushes, and it takes his tradition hundreds of years to figure it out. All of that is perfectly good, karma, jnana, bhakti, but best of all is simply total surrender to God. You go to the Lord, you throw yourself down on the ground, and the Lord takes care of you. And the tradition, even the most conservative of the later theologians from the 13th, 14th century, say all of this can be traced back to what Ramanuja said and didn't say. So on the one hand, he's holding firm to the orthodoxy of the tradition. He's as orthodox as anyone else. But on another level, he says, once you have these beautiful systems, karma, jnana, bhakti, then beyond that, there is the way of giving yourself over to God that is for everyone. Another thing he does that I think is very pertinent here is to reform the temple worship, the great Sri Rangam temple in South India near the current day city of Trichy. By tradition, he reformed the temple worship, allowing that untouchables too would have a role in the rituals in the temple. And apparently he got a great pushback from the Orthodox saying they're not allowed in. And he sort of says, well, it's none of your business. I'm in charge here. And they are allowed in. And even today, 1,000 years later, some of these same untouchable families, the lineages, perform rites in the temple. And again, I think Ramanuja is saying, let the rites be as they've always been. Let us do things as our ancestors did them. And now I'm pushing the door open to allow even not only Shudras, but untouchables to have a role. And he seems to want that kind of value of both tradition and doing something innovative and new at the same time. And then finally, just the last example, he's writing all his works in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the sacred language. Sanskrit is the language of orthodoxy. Sanskrit is the sacred eternal language. And he inspires his disciples to start reading and celebrating and commenting on Tamil poetry. And the beautiful poetry of the saints called the Alvars. And Alvar is a word that means like to be immersed in God or drowning, like deep into the reality. They didn't write in Sanskrit, but hundreds of years before Ramanuja, are doing it in the vernacular. And some are saying they can do whatever they want in the vernacular. You can do things in this language or that language. If it's not Sanskrit, it doesn't count. But although Ramanuja didn't actually talk about Tamil, he unfortunately doesn't even mention the word in his Sanskrit writings, immediately his immediate disciples started caring for and reciting and commenting on the Tamil poetry. So it seems that in temple ritual and in terms of sacred language, vernacular language, and in the sense of utter surrender to God is actually the best solution for everyone, he is actually a great reformer. But I think what's annoying for people, and in some ways bothers me, is that you have this statue of Ramanuja, 216 feet tall, and you have this celebration of the great reformer, but what about excluding the Shudras from reading the Veda? What about excluding the Shudras from the Upanishads? My point is that him as a reformer, you also have to understand at least that he also had this staunch traditionalist side. And that seeing this side of him in a sense helps that because he was a traditionalist, he could do something different and new that actually made a great difference. But he wasn't a total radical reformer and said, away with the rituals, away with Sanskrit, away with the Veda, let's do something different. But no, it's this and that. And I think it's not a matter of, do we agree with it? And when I stop talking, maybe you may not agree with it. But nonetheless, the challenge is to understand that somebody can be a traditionalist, their feet on the ground, so to speak, and then on that basis can do things that really couldn't be done and challenges us in the period in which we live, be it 1,000 years ago or today. And I think my lesson for us would be, I think you can see where it's going, is to say that we who want to change the world, who want to make peace, who want to stand up to power, who want to preach truth to power, et cetera, where do we stand? Where is our traditional base? Not that you have to make one up if you don't have it, but if you do, then to go back and dig deeper into it, like Ramanuja seemed to want to do, in order to become a different kind of person. Now, turning to my second example, with great trepidation, to talk about Mahatma Gandhi. There is so many experts in this room who know so much about Mahatma Ji and speak about him. And on this auspicious day, I could just sit down now and Professor Howard could come up and give the rest of the talk, is to try to say things that without saying the obvious to you. But I would say, and this is not entirely new to me, that Gandhi too was in a way that infuriated some people, including contemporaries, and infuriates people even today, a traditionalist and a reformer. And my argument is, because he was a traditionalist, he could be a reformer. And that if he was simply a reformer, he'd be this really sweet, loving 20th century, 21st century person, just like me, and then would accomplish nothing. But he had his feet on the ground, his feet in tradition, and was able to change things around him. And to point this out, John Titamanal, a wonderful professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York, at the 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth in 2019, I think, he talks about how marvelous it is that Gandhi was a profoundly conservative thinker. He was suspicious about human capacities to extricate ourselves from tradition patterns of belonging so as to assume novel identity configurations. He insisted on seeing things in their context and resisting the violence of contemporary life. So Titamanal, it's just an op-ed piece he did, a very beautiful piece, that to go back and realize that Gandhi was a traditionalist, and that when we honor Gandhi, we should not just see a reformer, but a reformer of a certain kind. Now, Titamanal, interesting, goes on to say, if we honor him, then, to quote Titamanal, how might we do this without falling into some of his most troubling errors, such as his incontestable short-sightedness regarding caste? And I would say, just for the sake of our argument, you can shake your fist at me if you want, that Titamanal misses the point at this point. Because Gandhi is a traditionalist, but he doesn't think about varna, adhikara, eligibility to perform sacrifices or study the Upanishads in exactly the way we do. And that he actually has this stubborn other side to him. And that if we don't get that, we may miss who Gandhi is. Now, I could point to different sources here. One source, Professor Howard's book, Gandhi's Ascetic Activism, Renunciation and Social Action, going back into the values of tradition on sexuality, brahmacharya, ways of thinking about traditional discipline, and that Gandhi was constantly tapping into the oldest parts of the tradition, echoing language in whatever language, particularly if he's speaking in Gujarati, let's say, or Hindi, echoing the Sanskrit terminology of tradition, and arguing that all of this is absolutely applicable in our time and place, be it 1910, 1920, 1940. And then sort of like Ramanujan, not really explaining what he's doing, saying, however, we reinterpret these terms in our time and place because we actually live in the 20th century, he would say. And by reinterpreting, we change the world, but we don't change the world by throwing these things out and saying, who needs brahmacharya? Who needs to be concerned about their sexual identity? Who needs any of that? No, we do have to be aware of these things that enable us to be able to change. And Vina's book, I think, beautifully shows this again and again, how he interpreted ancient myths and texts such as the Bhagavad Gita while borrowing ideas from Western sources, but he redefined Indian religious and philosophical concepts such as sacrifice, yajna, tapas, asceticism, ram rajya, rule or political power, to create a coherent narrative that in a sense is old and new at the same time. And that to see these things woven together is really a much deeper way of beginning to understand who Gandhi is. I could go on and on quoting from your book. I have more pages. I'll skip some of those pages. One of the interesting examples of this, which again can frustrate people, so when he's forming the ashram that's in Ahmedabad, there are rules about the ashram, rules about life in the ashram, and you talk about this in your book. And clearly is going back and forth about the Varna Ashrama Dharma, about the rules of a structured society, the hierarchical society. He's going back and forth about this. And on the one hand says, this document, as you say, this vow does not extend to association for, does not follow Varna Ashrama Dharma. So he's breaking out of the mold on the old way. He wants the ashram to be free of exclusions of any sort. However, he also says in the document, or if he wrote the document, this vow does not extend to association for purposes of eating. All that is desired is the eradication of the evil of untouchability. Then he goes on to say the ashram does not follow the Varnashrama Dharma, doesn't follow this ancient tradition. Having just said we follow it in certain ways. And then he goes on to say, however, the ashram has firm belief in Varnashrama Dharma. Does have firm belief in Varnashrama Dharma. The discipline of caste seems to have done no harm to this country. Rather, there is no reason to believe that eating in company promotes brotherhood or sisterhood ever so slightly. In order that the Dharma and caste discipline may in no way be undermined, the ashram inmates are under obligation when they stir out to subsist on fruits if they cannot cook their own food. So basically, keep to your own kind, keep to your family, keep to your tradition, do your own cooking. And in the ashram, we'll all live in harmony as if we're equals. Again, there's something going on there that can be very annoying to modern people. And I have a section here I won't go into about his debates with Dr. Ambedkar. Famously, Ambedkar, wanting to grab, maybe I don't think he ever did it, but grab Gandhi and shake him saying, look, get over it, let go of caste, let go of Varna. You don't need these things. And Gandhi saying, I'm totally 100% or more against untouchability, against any kind of degrading of individuals in society, and therefore let us restore Varna to its beautiful, pristine, original form. And Ambedkar is saying, no, it's corrupt all the way down. You have to throw it out. And Gandhi is saying, let us restore it to its beautiful, pristine form. And I think, again, there's a logic there that you and I don't have to agree with, but there's something staunch and deep about it, of saying, like Ramanuja 1,000 years before, we keep these traditions. We don't throw them out. We have no right to throw them out. Ramanuja didn't say anything about it's become impure, corrupted by evil teachers and so on. Gandhi does say we've messed it up over hundreds of years. The spirit of the original has been lost. But in both Ramanuja and Gandhi, to some extent, are saying, let us keep to the traditions. Ramanuja saying, these people do this, everybody else does that. And Gandhi saying, let us go back, get rid of the horrors of untouchability, and then we can live according to the Varna system one more time. And I think this is actually very basic to his thinking. One of the reasons I think he writes his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita is to talk about traditionalism and reform. And he talks about the idea of the Shishtachara. And the Shishtachara is the behavior of learned people. And he says, when possible, and he quotes verses from the Gita for this, always learn from your learned elders who have done the discipline themselves of learning from their elders and their elders and their elders. Now, if you come across an elder who actually is corrupt or dishonest, then you have to follow your own heart. But basically, whenever possible, you defer to the elders and you defer to their ways of doing things. And I think this is a profoundly traditional set of values that may or may not resonate with various people in the United States or the India of today. But he's pushing this, saying, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't get rid of the abuses and get rid of everything else at the same time. And one of the last things I'll point to in this section, and I'll go to my conclusion, would be to say that even in his political thinking, I think he's appealing to this kind of return to our origins, return to the way we do things here. There's a beautiful 3 books, actually, by Professors Bajaj and Srinivas in Madras, the Center of Policy Studies. A little bit right of center, I think, but they're good friends of mine, so I quote them. So Professors Bajaj and Srinivas did 3 volumes to celebrate the centenary of Hind Swaraj. And Hind Swaraj, Gandhi is kind of getting a sense of our freedom, the identity of being an Indian, our political identity under the British as we're trying to push the British out the door. And part of what's going on in the book, they say, is that Gandhi on the one side is saying, come on, we got to get our act together. The shame of colonialism and the British Raj has to do with we were spineless, we didn't live up to our potential, we were fighting among ourselves and letting the British trick us again and again and again. And on the other hand, we're also being corrupted by Western values. And he seems to want to say, we'll go back to traditional Indian values because it kind of puts it in the face of the British, saying, we don't have the same values as you people. We don't have your materialism. We don't have your pretense egalitarianism. We don't have your charity based on crude, crass capitalism. But we have our own way of doing things, and I think he sees, and this I think echoes the book also, ways of going back to traditional values like brahmacharya, like Varna, in order to push at the British and saying, you don't have the values of 20th and 21st century India. We do. And we will discover in our own way how to find a way between you and us. So Bajaj and Srinivas, in their book, they end up talking about his kind of a religious patriotism and the idea that you can't understand him as a religious figure if you leave out his attitudes toward Bharata Mata and putting together in India. And this can be taken in all kinds of crazy ways and can be offensive, we know, and how leaders of countries can manipulate and cynically use religion in order to get what they want. But I think at his best, he's trying to say, we have to be political. We have to reconnect religion and politics. And to do that, we cannot embrace 20th century British English language values. And we cannot, to go back where I started, and this is open to debate, we have to be careful not to equate words like Dharma with justice or human rights or peace, because Dharma is something else, and we have to get this something else into what we do. Just last thing I'd say here is that there's an interesting passage that they quote, and I think it may be in your book, about Tolstoy. Tolstoy, who in his later life was an incredibly spiritual writer, had a great influence on Gandhi, their correspondence and all that, said he was terribly disappointed that Gandhi was so political in his spirituality, and that Gandhi spoiled it by not being universal and for everyone, and sort of saying, India has to take care of itself, because that spoils your thing, Gandhi. You should be like me, Leo Tolstoy, living on my estate in Russia. You should be like me and being universal. And Gandhi saying, I'm sorry, you don't really understand what I'm talking about, do you then? To finish this section off, and I'll go to a quick conclusion, to say that I think one of the things we could do is, first of all, compare and contrast Ramanuja and Gandhi. I probably haven't given you enough information to do it, but 2 kinds of traditional reformers. Ramanuja is sort of saying, on the one hand, we have this, Let them do it because God wants them to do it, and God will take care of them, and they're doing it. And there is this, the much larger reality of surrender, giving yourself to God, that is for everybody. But there's no reason to take away that. So you kind of say traditional values and then everything else, which is larger and more beautiful. But don't try to destroy that. Leave it. Let them have it. Whereas Gandhi's saying, let us take all the traditional values and reinterpret them, because over the centuries, they've been corrupted and misunderstood. Let us take all of that out and go back to the pristine values of our ancestors from 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and go back to that. And these are two different forms. Ramanuja didn't have a historical consciousness, so he's not talking about decline over centuries. But in some ways, he is finding a way to accommodate the old and the new, and Gandhi is reinterpreting the old in order to give power to the new. And I think it would be an interesting question for us to ask, if it makes any sense what I'm saying to you, are we more like Gandhi or more like Ramanuja? Everybody wants to be like Gandhi. Everybody wants to see him as one of our heroes that we admire greatly, and rightly so. But on the other hand, do we really deep down share the range of his values? Or in some ways, are we more like Ramanuja, let them do it and we'll do something else? Or are we like neither of them? We're like the Englishman who comes stomping into India and says, I have new values for you. Clap, please clap because I'm giving you something new, English education and so on. The last part of what I'd say is that, again, going back to the very worthy topic of this conference and what we're going to be talking about tomorrow in these very interesting panels tomorrow, is about how to connect the issues of today and all the issues that we worry about, including social distrust, ecological degradation, systematic inequality, religious intolerance, injustice, et cetera, how does Dharma shed new light on that? And then to ask ourselves, which form of Dharma are we talking about? And are we making cozily Dharma too much what we want it to be? It's sort of there, and Dharma can be this for me, and it can be that for you, and that's all very beautiful. Or are there like rough edges to Dharma, as I found in the very kind of tough Mimamsa tradition that is right in our face and saying, you want to follow Dharma? Guess what? There are things you have to do that you don't want to do. And if you don't want to do them, then don't talk about Dharma. Use some other term. Use some English language term or something like that. So where do we stand on this? And how do we think about Dharma? Not assuming that we understand the term. In some good way, it's an unfamiliar term to us. And I can't speak for all of us. It's an unfamiliar term to somebody like me who didn't grow up in a culture of Hindu values or South Asian traditions, etc., sampradayas and so on. But for many of us living in the West, we think we know what it means, and my question is, do we know what it means? Look at figures in history. I gave you two, Ramanuja and Gandhi. There may be others as well. The second thing is, what are our traditions? And I've been talking about these figures. I'm a Roman Catholic, as was said, and I come out of a Christian background with the Hebrew Bible biblical heritage. How does that affect how I'm giving this talk right now? How does it affect what I think Dharma is? When I talk about Ramanuja's view of the loving God, is that implicitly the God of Christianity? What are the other elements? If we're not simply 100% this or this, our hybrid backgrounds, our complicated backgrounds, and I think many, born in South Asia, living in the West might have some of these same complications. Who are we and how does that all figure in? When it comes to the end of the day and say, I'm doing this when I'm young and I want to do it when I'm old, what tradition are we putting our stance on? What is the ground we're standing on fully? And I think we have to be able to self-analyze and say most of us are not 100% Dharmic tradition. Some will be, none of my business. But rather it changes and we have to rethink it over and over again. And then finally, when we talk about tradition and reform, can we do both at the same time? Let us reform the world. Let us make a better world. Let us work to push back at power. Is there room in our analysis to talk tradition at the same time? And I would think, and this is just for the sake of argument, that we would do better if we appeal to traditions that have survived for thousands of years, have resisted many petty rulers and dictators and corrupt systems, and not simply be, I stand for these beautiful values, and I forgot what my tradition was altogether. Dharma and tradition, Dharma as radical tradition, all that goes together in Ramanuja, in Gandhi, in you and me. So on that happy note, I will stop. Thank you all. Oh, yes, yes.
All right. Thank you so much for this lovely talk. And not 3 hours, not 3 hours, 40 minutes, a little bit more.
Yeah.
We do have some room for questions still, and we typically go students first. We are all students, of course, but so let's see. What questions do we have? You are a student.
He's very young looking.
Yes. Go ahead.
So there seems to be a dialectical tradition and reform that does lead to a synthesis of ethical and political action. Because it has to, especially with Gandhi. So can you speak about that? You spoke about this dialectic. You know, he's an innovator because he's a traditionalist, right? But this innovation that is a traditionalist does lead to very concrete political and ethical action within the Indian context.
Yeah.
So how does he get to that synthesis that leads to that political action?
Thank you. So I think for both Ramanuja, my two examples, I picked figures that I think this works with, tradition and reform. And I think on the one hand, the appeal to tradition is a basis for critique of the present moment. And looking at not simply, let's take a majority vote on what we should do, but rather saying there are traditional values that we have no right to change. That gives a certain kind of disciplinary freedom to look at the world of whenever, including today, and see it differently. And then if you happen to be a figure like Ramanuja, who reforms the temple worship, who brings in the Tamil as well as the Sanskrit, who pushes for this surrender to God as opposed to ritualism, all of that I think is premised on the fact that he could stand free of his society by not attacking his society all the time, but in a sense knowing the tradition and then saying, but there's more. And then Gandhi, and again, Veena could speak to this very well, there's a sense in which you look at and you reinterpret the traditions to which we belong, and if you do that in a way that resists so-called outside influences or corrupting modern influences, it doesn't make you a fanatic who then hates everybody, but it gives you the freedom to be critical, saying, again, dictators and bullies come and go, but we're going to survive because our traditions are very old, and we speak to the moment out of a certain sense of belonging and saying something new.
Okay.
We don't want to miss any word that you say.
I want to add something.
Just
After Gandhi. There is something new here. After Gandhi, the Constitution of India came into force 1950. So there is an update on, it's called Samvidhan Dharma. It's a new, you can say new phase of knowledge added next to Gandhi that might interest you. There's a book there if you need, I have it at home. It's called Samvidhan Gandhi, Samvidhan Dharma, and it's in English. So it would be readable. Just something to add on.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be a certain kind of ahistorical error to say that these figures are frozen in time and that nothing happened after Ramanuja, nothing happened after Gandhi, but rather no, things keep changing. I mean, they barely have said something when the next day somebody's reinterpreting and something new is said, maybe prompted by them, or as with Dr. Ambedkar, in dissatisfaction with them, forced to say something else. But I'd appreciate the reference. Thank you.
Okay, any students?
Student.
Okay, I agree with students first, so I'll yield, but I do want to ask my question.
Okay. We'll not leave the room before Jeff Long asks his question. But students first.
Thank you. That was a great reading of Gandhi, and I just want to know here how we should read figures like how we should read your reading here, I guess. So I see there are maybe 2 or 3 possibilities here. One is that me, myself, as a person, finds my dharma and then reinterpret it. That's one way to take this reading forward, the way Gandhi was, to take Gandhi as an ideal. or Ramanujan as an ideal and take that forward. The other is that I do take the new ideas that I get from Gandhi or Ramanujan, place it in my Dharma, and reinterpret it.
Yeah.
And then the third possibility, I see third so far, but there may be more, that take them as a package still, that we still need to read Gandhi as a package with his tradition and with his reforms and with the novel interpretation that Gandhi provides us. So which one do you think you'd prefer, if I can ask?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I think, Gandhi, and I alluded to the passage from the Gita, says as much as possible, shishtachara, follow the wisdom of those who have been trained already and gone before you. But when they seem to be absolutely wrong, you have the right and the obligation to make up your mind and do what is honest and non-corrupt and so on like that. I think probably both Ramanuja and Gandhi might be hesitant to say simply my Dharma or your Dharma in the singular, because in some sense it has to be our Dharma, that the Dharma is not a possession, everybody doesn't have their own way. Think of the use of Swadharma in the Bhagavad Gita, and Dharma as this larger reality. And I mentioned the Mimamsa saying, it's not about you or me anyway, it's about this larger system. So the ability to kind of step back from an egocentrical view, even with the best intentions, and say, what is the larger pattern in which I now have to make my choices? And I think there should be at least a step, it sounds like nothing, a step of hesitation. If I decide the tradition is absolutely wrong on this or that, to sleep on it overnight and see if you still believe that the next day. Because in some sense it can be easier to say the abuses of tradition and the hierarchies and those people are hypocrites and all that. It can be too easy here now to do that. And what is lost? Even family values and so on like that, things that once you lose them, you can't get them back, that have little to do with me, but it's been done in the past. Does that help? I don't.
You have more opportunities.
Okay. We could talk afterwards if you want.
Hello? My name is Paris Contreras. I'm in one of Dr. Howard's classes. I kind of have several questions that I wrote down during your lecture. So I am sorry to bombard you with questions.
That's all right. I won't answer them anyway, don't worry.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'll try.
If the world is interconnected through Dharma, would we be living in the consequence of individuals who did not complete their Dharma?
Who did not?
Who did not complete their Dharma.
Yeah.
And then according to the understanding that individuals will fail to commit to their Dharma, or those that are actively prevented from committing their Dharma, would it be correct for someone to assume that the universe will never be in its correct place?
Okay.
And if every decision we have is predetermined through the universe, then what does it matter if an individual does not complete their Dharma? And wouldn't there not be a concept such as Dharma because everyone has already completed it through order of the universe?
I think, thank you. There are a number of, let me try to answer in general, and then we can talk afterwards too. I mean, I think in some sense, Gandhi certainly knew, and Ramanuja 1,000 years before, that people screw up, and that people say things and don't do them, that people are hypocrites. Also, in the older Mimamsa tradition, there are all kinds of rules about if you forget something in the ritual, if you leave something out, if you misstate the mantra, if you don't do the right sacrifice, if you're impure on that day and you shouldn't have been doing it at all, here are the things you do, the prayaschittas to make up for the mistakes you made. So even in a ritual context, it's not unimportant for an individual to correct mistakes they've made. And Ramanuja's, again, even I mentioned that passage talking about the twice-born, they go through a process of purification. The Lord gives them this system and meditations and asceticism and traditional practices by which they become purer and purer, and then they study, and then the Lord turns on the light. And it seems that it also takes into account human failure, but that the human failure is accounted for. For Ramanuja, you might say, on the one hand, there are ways to deal with this traditionally, and this kind of sense of the compassionateness of the God figure. And then Gandhi explicitly is talking about, as in the Gita passage I referred to, there are people, always follow your elders, always do what the wisdom of the tradition is. However, if it seems that they're being hypocritical, selfish, arrogant, fake, then you have to go back and rely on yourself. But it seems that they would say there are these kind of self-corrective features in the universe, and not to, if you just think of like an environmental parallel, and I'm not an environmentalist, so I'm speaking over my head, but that nature can sometimes correct itself. Like when something has happened, a pollution, or when some imbalance, other things can happen to like push things back again. And it's sort of like the universe will correct itself because it's in the universe's interest to continue as it always has. And it can be ruthless at times in wiping out the danger. And I think either morally or by nature or by divine will, they all might be saying, eventually the mistakes and the errors and the arrogant individualism will be pushed aside and the system restored. We could talk more.
Okay, so I've been writing a piece on Gandhi and Ambedkar, and as which you characterized very nicely their debate. And Gandhi, in fact, it's interesting. He does want to. He dislikes everything about caste that Ambedkar dislikes, and then he says, "But it's in the Shastras," and he says, "I don't see how one could remain a Hindu and reject it." Yeah. Ambedkar takes that offer and says, okay, I'm not a Hindu anymore, and becomes a Buddhist, and then proceeds to get rid of the Four Noble Truths and Nirvana and all of that, but that's another story. My question, or what I'm inviting to hear what you think of this, another, in many ways very traditional, in other ways not, figure of the modern period, Sri Ramakrishna, when asked about things in the Shastra that seemed unjust or unreasonable, said, the Shastra is a mix of sand and sugar. And the discerning will remove the sugar and leave the sand. Yeah. And I was quite shocked to see that he seems more radical than Gandhi, actually. And yet he's very much a revered figure of the traditions. I'm not sure what you would think of that.
Well, I think, there are many things said about, the wonderful Ramakrishna that we could say. But part of it is that he's a master teacher with a strong sense of helping people to understand the situations in which they find themselves. And therefore the ability, like viveka, to be able to discern the sand and the sugar, the bitter and the sweet, the poison and what is ambrosial, to be able to sort these things out. In a sense, that's always been the case. Now, I think, and you would know better than I, that for Ramakrishna, part of it is like this pastoral imagery of an agricultural society. Like we know what farmers do when there's something going wrong in the fields. We know what the merchant does when they have the grain, the sack of grain, and there's some bug in it or something, or the fruit is rotting. These kind of homely instances about people know what to do when things go wrong. Maybe more radical than Gandhi. That's a very interesting perspective. But then you could say, well, Ramakrishna didn't have to liberate India from the British. Or somebody could say, doing what Ramakrishna did liberate India from the British through Vivekananda and others. But the sense that Gandhi was, juggling many things, and part of it was implicit, I'm resisting the Raj, I'm resisting these smug Englishmen who come and impose their values on us. And therefore, Gandhi and Christianity, Ramakrishna and Christianity, and Christ, in both cases, would be an interesting, intense case of that, about what do they think about the religion of the imperialists, and then the person of Jesus, let's say, how they sort it out in terms of what can be taken and what can't be taken. And it seemed, Gandhi said, and I have no problem with Christ, but that, what about Christian civilization? They should try it sometime, that kind of thing. That the great ambivalence has to be there, as with other, with Islamic groups that came into India. There has to be this ambivalence about the heritage that doesn't have to reduce to, a polemic against any religion, but it has to be a sense of we're naturally ambivalent because of what they did to us. And that has to be healed, forgiven, rectified. And they do it in different ways. But that's very good to bring him in as another traditional reformer. Yeah, thank you.
So, Professor Clooney, going back a little bit on failure, wrongdoing, and tradition, right? In the context of failure and wrongdoing, and a wrongdoing that is, say, for example, time-dependent and context-dependent, such as rituals, for example, does it make sense to point fingers towards the past and criticize how things were done, like in the cases you spoke of? And how does Dharma play into this?
Well, I think part of it would be the way I tried to start in trying to talk about the ritual background, the ritual theory, mimamsa, and so on like that, is we have to at least be able to try to think about these things the way ancient sources tell us they were thinking. And it's kind of, what I mentioned, like in my memoir that I wrote, when I first studied mimamsa in the early 80s, it was so refreshing to me because I couldn't fit it into any Western intellectual system. It wasn't like Plato, it wasn't like Aristotle, it wasn't like canon law, it wasn't this, it wasn't that, it was something else. And to realize that there's a certain sense that these are things going on here that we who grew up in the West of a different religious tradition don't really get. And therefore, a lot of learning has to take place before we start, speaking about it with some kind of authority. But to go back it's always a problem about, how our ancestors messed things up. We talk about, the heritage of slavery in this country, or, colonialism and the rich ripping off the poor. What do we do about the past? And a lot of people will say intuitively, well, we shouldn't blame people alive today because they didn't do it. Like one of my ancestors came over from Ireland in the 1840s during the potato famine, when 1 million Irish people died because the British had ruined the crops, the way crops were grown in Ireland. But I could blame King Charles, I suppose, but I'm not going to, for this. And therefore, but also to have a critical attitude toward the past. And part of my view would be, again, to say this, this is what Ramanuja said about Shudras in that section I was quoting to. Why is it that he and Shankara are more harsh and have those horrible quotations than the Mimamsa older tradition was, which was very kind of impersonal? To be able to resist it and say, I hate what you're saying, you shouldn't be quoting those texts, there's something horribly wrong here. And why is it that you people don't seem to see the problem? Like you can quote this text and then talk about non-dualism. You can quote this text and talk about God's love and talk about slitting the tongue of a Shudra. There's something I don't understand here. And we could say, I'm not going to accept it, but not immediately to go to say, point fingers and say, they're evil, they're benighted. But rather, maybe I don't understand even what they were talking about. But you can see, it can then get implicated in, okay, so I guess, if you were there and then, I guess it was okay. If you lived in 1800, I guess slavery was okay. No, we can't do that. But in some way, not to be simply judging the past by what seems in our own generation to make sense. Because the tradition, as Mimamsa would say, is far older than us and will all be gone and tradition will still be there. Because it's not going away. I don't know.
And with that, we are at the end of our Q&A. Let us first thank our speaker.